So we are going to start with our first talk, which will be by Jeff Kimpel. Jeff earned his bachelor's degree in psychology from Denison University and his master's and PhD from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Jeff is also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and he was awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service in Vietnam in 1967-1968. A few other things about Jeff. He was the Associate Dean of the College of Engineers, the Director of the School of Meteorology, the Dean of the College of Geosciences, and the Senior Vice President and Provost of the Norman campus. He's also retired as the Director of the Federal National Severe Storms Laboratory, and he retired in 2010. I should also note that he's a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, and he's also past president of the American Meteorological Society. So given how long, given his great service at all the different, sorry, that slipped out. Given his great service in all these different roles, I thought he'd be the ideal person to talk about the history of SIMS. So Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. What Greg mentioned was I have a hard time holding down a job, so what can I say? If nothing else from my talk, I want you to remember this bridge, because that's what SIMS is. It's a bridge between the University of Oklahoma and NOAA. Without one of those entities, it would be a bridge to nowhere. So you've got to have both connected by the 3 C's of the Weather Center, which is collaboration, cooperation, and co-location. Those are the 3 C's that built this place. Before I go on, I just want to make sure everybody realizes what a great deal cooperative institutes are. They're probably one of the most symbiotic organizations known to humankind. Because if you think about it, having a cooperative institute in Norman at the university invests millions, hundreds of millions in academic programs that are relevant to NOAA. And the university invests hundreds of millions of dollars in educating students that are employable by NOAA. What an amazing arrangement NOAA gets out of a couple $1 million, what did I hear, $19 million investment in SIMS. What does the university get? The university gets expertise residing nearby. The university gets adjunct faculty that teach some courses. I am amazed that some of the forecasting courses at the graduate level in the School of Meteorology are actually taught by some of the best forecasters in the world at the Storm Prediction Center and the local Weather Service Forecast Office. And students are employed, graduate students are supported, and that little $20 million deal, and that's the record, by the way, in the history, and you look in the past, it wasn't always like that. So I just wanted to point that out and say it's a perfect symbiotic relationship. So how did SIMS get started? It's kind of a fascinating story because it's related to the other SIMS. The SIMS at University of Wisconsin, the Cooperative Institute for Satellite Service, Meteorological Satellite Services. And what was going on in 1976? Well, first of all, the first Cooperative Institute was Ceres at the University of Colorado in 1967. But in the mid-70s, Bill Smith was a NOAA employee in Washington, D.C., and he had a group of satellite people that he was talking to Vern Sumi in the Space Science and Engineering Center at the University of Wisconsin, and he was going to move them to Madison, to the beautiful Space Science and Engineering Center building, 15-story building, and then create a cooperative institute to facilitate interaction between those two organizations. Well, Rex Inman talked to Bill, and Rex didn't have to move anything because Ed Kessler and NSSL were already here. So even though the idea germinated with Sims in Madison, Wisconsin, we actually beat him to the punch and established the other Sims in Norman in 1978. And it wasn't until 1980 that the other one was established. So Rex Inman, who was the chair of the meteorology department, Ed Kessler, Rex becomes the first director of Sims in 1978. It's hard to find a picture of Rex. It was pre-internet, but there is one. He was the Sims director from 1978 to 1980, followed by Yoshi Sasaki from 1980 to 1986. Both of those were in the old building, the old engineering laboratory building. Look at the radiator behind Yoshi Sasaki. That gives you some flavor for what we were dealing with. Now, how many of you here were students in the old engineering laboratory building? Those were the good old days. Okay, you can remember that. Doug Lilly took over in 1986 until 1991. We'll talk about that, and then Pete Lamb came in 1991 until he passed away in 2014. I really want to give a shout out to Randy Pepler, who was the interim director for 3 years. I think that's probably the record length of being an interim director in any organization that I'm aware of, and he kept the place together, he kept the trains running on time. And now we have, of course, Greg McFarquhar, who's been here for a year, and we expect great things from him. In fact, Yoshi, Doug, and Pete were all George Lynn Cross Research Professors, the highest research honor that the University of Oklahoma bestows on a faculty member. Now, I also wanted to put up here where the Sims offices were located, but there's not many places left where they were. The original one with Rex and beginning of Yoshi was the old engineering laboratory building, a building so old it was built before electricity, an engineering building that was so out of touch with the world that it had no women's restroom. But that all got fixed, of course. Yoshi moved Sims to a church, a repurposed church that unfortunately was on the corner of Boyd and Jenkins, the southeast corner, and got Raz to build the Energy Center. So Doug moved Sims to the Drake building on the other side of the railroad tracks to the east across from the Mont, and it got Raz to build this very odd apartment complex that's wedged between the railroad tracks and the gas station, but still has easy access to the Mont. But I didn't put pictures of those. I didn't put pictures of those up there because they're gone. Now, also, Emily, I want to thank you for, I don't know where she found these ancient pictures out of newspapers or Sooner magazine, but on the left is Rex Inman, the second picture that I'm aware existing of Rex, with Peter McDonald, who was an OU graduate, but he was the chief of the Navajo Nation. And so here's Rex showing him the Norman Doppler, the beginning of everything radar in Norman, Oklahoma. And on the right, here is Doug Lilly and Yoshi. Look at this, with an Apple IIe and floppy disks. Now, I know there's people in this room that have no idea what those are, but let me tell you, at the time, they were state of the art. So, Steve Koch, I want you to tell us who the first 3 Sims employees were.
Oh.
That's you, Steve Koch, right?
I was one of them.
Yeah.
I was one of them. Carrie Emanuel was the other. And the third was... Hello, I'm Steve Koch. I was one of them. Carrie Emanuel, who went to MIT afterwards, and then Steve Bloom, who went to Goddard. And I went with Steve in 1980. I was a 1-year postdoc at Sims in that old church building at the corner.
So we had 3 famous people started off at NSSL, and it only got better from there, right? Just kidding. The research seams. The first three on the list here are pretty much the original research themes for SIMS: weather radar, storm scale and mesoscale modeling, and forecast improvements in research. And when Pete got here, he expanded SIMS into two more areas: climate change related to extreme weather events, and also socio and economic impacts of high impact weather that Kelvin Drogemeyer picked up from. It was a national priority from the National Science Board to link science and people. And I'm really happy to say we've got a very good program spinning up here in Norman, in SIMS, in that important field. I have no idea why I did this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And this is actually on-the-job training for Greg. Being in this job, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to come out of left field, and you never know what's going to take time away from your research and your students. But think about this. Here's a SMART-R radar. It was a shared resource involving SIMS between OU, NOAA, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. Who buys the insurance? Who does the insurance cover? Who can drive the truck? Well, believe it or not, we actually worked out a thing. It took us about 2 years, and then the administrations changed, and when we went to renew it, they said, no deal, you got to disassemble everything. That took a lot of work, and I'll just say, things like that happen all the time. Feds who had SIMS people working for them used to evaluate them and send them in to the university, recommend raises, evaluate their performance. We got a no from Department of Commerce attorney. Oh, the worst thing that can happen as SIMS director is you pick up the phone and it says, hi, I'm so-and-so, attorney from the Department of Commerce. Or, I'm so-and-so, I'm legal counsel for the University of Oklahoma. When that happens, you know it's going to be a bad day. That's all I can say. We used to hire SIMS people to do everything with computers, from high-end computer programming to doing all the IT support. Well, we got challenged by some private companies, and we had to give that up. So now we have multiple IT companies. But the good thing was we were able to preserve the high-end computing, the scratch computing, the scientific computing in SIMS. And we have a lot of good people there now. The biggest one, the one that I remember the most, is we got a renewal, a 5-year renewal, and attached to it were special ward conditions. And the ward conditions said you can no longer do anything in SIMS with weather radar. Think of that. I mean, that was kind of our bread and butter at the time. So Pete and I went to Washington, and fortunately we had the support of the AA and the deputy associate administrator, and we got together with the lawyers. And I was so proud. You can have good bosses. That happens sometimes, just so you know. And the lawyers said, well, not only can you not do radar research, you can't do anything useful to NOAA. I can't make this up. They lost a legal case about digitizing strip charts. And the DAA, Louisa Koch, I'll never forget, she just stood up. She said, out. Get out, to all the attorneys, and all the attorneys left. And somehow it all got worked out. I have no idea how she did it, but that got fixed. Pete also had this wonderful idea for a logo. If you look at the logo in the upper right, the white is a U, the red is a O for OU, and the blue, and the seagull is NOAA. Well, we got a call from the attorney on that. Turns out the NOAA portion, the seagull part in the ocean and the atmosphere are trademarked, and we had to take it off. However, there are times when SIMS does work really good. When we were script consultants for the movie Twister, we had worked out a deal with Universal Studios. By the way, the NSSL logo was developed in concert with Universal Studios, and it's also trademarked. And the deal we had with Universal Studios was they were going to put it on everything they sold, coffee cups, hats, shirts, and we were going to get 7% of the gross to spend on research at NSSL. Well, the lawyers went nuts, and so we had to add, if you look in the bottom, that U.S. Department of Commerce, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration to the logo, and we got a call from Universal Studios. Jeff, we're going to embroider those. We're out. We're having our own logo. Goodbye. But the good thing was that they said, we want to honor the contract. We want to give you the first year of our estimate of what the funding would be if we could keep this deal. So we tried to give a gift to the federal government. Let me tell you, that doesn't work too well. So we went in and we said, a lot of Sims people had a lot to do with helping the Twister thing and building the Twister attraction at Universal Studios in Florida. You could give it to Sims. So they gave, I forget, it was $50,000, $60,000 to Sims, went in the foundation, and it bought one of the trucks under one of the SMART-R radars. So Sims are very useful in that regard. Very important, 2 major organizations were born out of Sims. When Doug was the director, he wrote the proposal for CAPS. CAPS was a big deal. Kelvin Drogemeyer was the co-PI, and NSF about had a hissy over one of their premier science and technology centers was run out of a NOAA Cooperative Institute. So what we had to do is we had to dissolve that relationship. Doug moved to the Center for Analysis and Prediction to the CAPS side, left Sims, and then we hired Pete Lamb to replace him. So that's why that transition happened. While Pete was coming in, a very interesting RFP came out for the Department of Energy Atmospheric Radiation Measurement Program, which was measuring clouds to try to improve cloud modeling and climate models. So Pete actually wrote that proposal when he was still in Illinois, but we knew he was coming here. We'd already hired him, and so he came and caught that proposal. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time, it's amazing to me the growth in Sims. I mean, here's just the last 10 years. It grew from roughly $10 million to $19 million. The blue is the support from NOAA. So most of the support comes from NOAA. If you think where it started, this is huge. And the other thing that's very interesting is the number of students that are supported by Sims. Graduate students over the last 5 years have been about 30 to lower 30s. That's about a third of all the graduate students in the School of Meteorology. But look at the undergraduates. Undergraduate students can work in NOAA part-time, roughly 40 each year can get support toward their education. So wrapping up, 40 years. Steve Koch said there were 3 employees. Now there's 195. I got this information last week. I've been corrected. There's 197. So 2 more people have been added in the last week. So the growth's still positive. That's a good thing. 40 years, annual expenditures rose from a couple $100,000 to $19 million. If you want to know the value of what you get from a research organization, multiply it by 10. A research grant can be $1 million over 5 years. What's wonderful about Sims is support comes every year. 19 million a year, every year. So over 10 years, that's $190 million. That's real substantial funding for the programs here in Norman. Currently, 12 NOAA and 6 Sims scientists are adjunct faculties. They supervise graduate students. They teach courses. And I will just, the other thing is federal scientists can submit proposals through OU. That's how essentially our lightning program got supported every year, Don McGorman, Dave Rust. And I will just submit that Sims is the heart of the Weather Center because it draws NOAA and OU together. I'm in trouble. You said I'd be in trouble if you stood up.
I said when I stand right
Okay,
beside you.
okay.
This is sort of,
Okay, everybody else can relax, all the future speakers can relax. So that's it. Any questions? No questions?
we've got one right here.
Oh, there's
Sebastian.
another one back there too.
Oh, one back there. Okay, here first and then back there.
It's Jamie.
Okay, hand one microphone to Sebastian and then take the other one back there. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff, for a great presentation. I wanted to ask you if you could give our young scientists at SIMS a piece of advice, since you've seen and lived so much.
You know, the younger Sims people have a way of burrowing in, finding very interesting and important things to do related to NOAA, work with their supervisor, and I can't tell you, there's another graph I wish I'd put on here. How many Sims people have been here more than 20 years? Plus, how many Sims people have transitioned to federal positions, and how many Sims people have transitioned to faculty positions? There is a path into more permanent employment if that's what you're looking for. But you can really have a career in Sims. And the other thing about Sims is that as opposed to being a Fed, you can consult. So a lot of people want to be in Sims and they don't want to be Feds.